And it's showtime, everyone. And I'm in darkness again. Well, from the darkness, I can report that today is King's Day. I think it's also the burial of the Pope Day. Um, but I got to enjoy King's Day because why don't we do the celebration first? Because that's cooler. and yeah, I had a really interesting experience walking among people. I've been thinking about clothing. Um, So there's actual physical clothing, but also the way that people carry themselves, right? Like they're in clothing, and it just like it started speaking to me, and it was like I was just seeing all of the spirits moving people, right? And how they were holding people and all that. And I'm like just like, okay, like I guess this is what I'm doing here. Like this is uh my participation here. Um, and yesterday during prayer there was this thing about a king who was imprisoned, and we were talking about his prison clothing being replaced by the Babylonian king, right? He gave him new clothing, and this idea, right, that yeah, like you still wear the clothing from that which imprisoned you, right? Like you got to discard that clothing because like if you keep wearing that, like people are going to see you as that, right? Like that clothing is going to speak for you, right? It's going to it, it's going to make you an agent in a certain arena, right? And then like it's going to inhibit all the other things, right? That you could partake in because you end up being constrained by your clothing. Um, so yeah, that was just like an angle uh, that was really present for me this week, and in some sense, we also clothe ourselves in the text when we read, right? Like we wear it in a certain manner, right? And like it brings us something, like it brings us into a being or into a relationship. So I'm just playing with like, okay, like what's the requirement there? But that's kind of my angle that I'm gonna take in this week. So Christopher, you wanna go?
Yeah, I've got my heading here set as a graceful integration because it's kind of a take on the ending last. What I was thinking about the ending last week, and yeah, so we've got heaven and earth, time and space, and coming up. Abraham here is falling off Adam, doing that at a somewhat different scale, and so you've got angels coming down, encountering Abraham on the, from a heaven would be an extreme space thing, going down to Sodom and Gomorrah, which is very extreme time. And you have Abraham encountered in the middle, and he does try to do some mediation between the two. So that's kind of how I'm maybe reframing mediation a little bit. So um, maybe Castle can go next.
Yeah, so my intention is actually, it's kind of just another aspect of what you're looking at. So I have my little subtitle here as elevation realization. So relevance and elevation are etymologically linked in the same way, which is to make lighter. But if you're using relevance realization, you're seeing what makes elevation possible. And then elevation realization is a lot closer to integration or mediation. So you are actually participating in this. I have a point in the upcoming chapter that we're going to go over about the root of oaks of Mamre that I'll talk about. But it's very much this thing of there's different ways that you can integrate something. You can just kind of stash something, you can just throw it in the trunk, or you can properly sort things. It has to do with that intentional mediation. In the case of hosting, you have the hospitality, you have the invitation, you have kind of the dual submission of the two parties. The kind of like, okay, we're going to accommodate the guest, but then also the guest is going to maybe take off their shoes, and they're going to submit to the hospitality to a certain degree, and that's going to be negotiated. So a bit of that, a little bit of filtering, also just kind of realizing, like, in the same way of what are you elevating, and when you're realizing that thing that you're elevating, is it something that's good? Like, have you properly filtered? Or is it good yet by the time that you're doing it? Like, is it ready to be served? And that, in the case of like a food or something like that, it's like, is the chicken properly cooked yet, or is it undercooked? Like, you have to kind of be able to gauge these things and discern. So that's sort of where I'm coming from for this week. Gustavs, will you please?
Sure. So this week, I've been thinking a lot about how in hierarchy, moving upwards, you have to abandon certain things that are kind of weight and so on, and I think that has to do with things like fasting and so on, actually. And there's like I've encountered a lot of pushback on these ideas of like abandoning the lower to go higher, or kind of that's one of the ways to frame it, but I think there's other ways to frame it, and so I'm going to be thinking about that. Mark, you're the one left.
I am the odd man out, as it were. There's an odd number of us, and I am the oddest, that is for sure. These later chapters, again, I haven't actually read these later chapters before, unlike the rest, almost the entire rest of the book, just because I got bored. I got to admit, I got bored. But there's a lot of stuff in here, because again, especially these later chapters from like 66 or so on are roll-ups. Like, by this point in the book, you should be really familiar with the diagrams and the previous usages of them, which enables you to tie things together, using the poetic way of informing the world, or symbolically, as the symbolic world people would say. And so I think that, again, what you're seeing here is more the higher level sorts of tying together of things, and at the same time, it's getting interestingly more pragmatic, right? And so again, my intent is to just sort of point out like where you might have missed the pragmatic application, or the stuff that's say relevant today, although that's getting easier because it's more explicit in these later chapters. So my task to some extent is getting much easier.
Yeah, so I want to take that a bit further, right? Because I realize more of my frustrations is like he's using like you said, right? Like the things of the past to interpret a story in the present, right? And I was just like realizing you're twisting the story because you're not focusing on the most important aspect, right? Because like when you get further in Genesis, the relationships complexify, right? So the while there is a continuation of the cosmic representation, right? Like the highest level is recurring in the lower level, right? There's different relationships that become primary, and different roles of aspect, right? And he's focusing on, well, time and space as two things, right? That always, like, they're always ever present in every fractal layer, right? Because there's the inside and the outside, and they have an interaction, right? So does anybody want to have something about last week, or are we good to move on? Because I want to start with Abraham. Okay, we're going to start with Abraham. So I want to connect this to Gustav's intention immediately. So the way that I understood the washing of the feet, right? So like when you walk, you carry parts of the road with you, literally on your feet, right? So in order to traverse to a place, like you're accumulating things on the way. And I think the host invites people in, and the washing of the feet is literally the ritual where you excrete, right, or you shed that which you've accumulated in order to be properly received, right? So like I think the washing is representative of the the preparation of assuming the new identity, right? Without the burden, right? Because you were talking about the weight, the carrying of things of the past, right? And so like the washing of the feet is leaving that behind. Uh, it's also like in some sense a removal from the earth, right? So because like now you're like the thing that that is mediating your relationship to the earth, right? Like in order to wash your feet, you have to lift them off the earth, right? Like you apply something on them. Um, yeah, so I use the word journey here instead of, but yeah, like so you've journeyed, right? Like so there's a way in which you came to be at the place, um, and I'm even gonna connect to castle because I also looked up the oaks of Mamre, and yeah, I wanna hear what you have to say about them first because I think they're really important in how we are to understand this.
Yeah, so that is, it's definitely really interesting. So mamre means well fed and could imply fat or strong. So the difference between, if you're eating a lot of food, the difference between whether or not that makes you fat or strong is actually related to participation in a higher principle. Are you applying that towards something, or are you just sitting there and storing it? And that makes a big difference. And I think that that's also something, because you're using it, like not all of that food, if you're exercising and you're getting strong, you increase, but there's also a lot of kind of offloading of that, like you're exhaling fat in your sleep. Like there's a lot of these things that are happening. And you're burning a lot of that energy anyway. Like a lot of that is not actually being absorbed. So you have that physical aspect, and then there's that where you have the washing of the feet, you have the letting go of sort of, in a sense, of the transient stuff or the stuff that's of the past. I mean, Abraham already did that with his father's tent, and they were reasonably rich as well at the time. So he cleaned himself before that journey that he was going on. So there's definitely something about kind of lightening the load for the next journey, and then just that aspect of also, to your point, Manuel, about having to raise your feet. Like for the renewal, you have to kind of go horizontal for a little while. So you're removing the excess weight, and then also providing a cycle of time before you start again. So there's also kind of a healing aspect and a restful regenerative aspect.
Yeah, so I wanted to add a bunch of things to the yoke, right? Because like who's Abraham representing, right? And so like there's a connection with adulthood, uh, with the intellect, with awareness, and in some sense even fulfillment, right? Because like if you're eating the food, right, like you're full, right, like you're getting the full bounty of the land, right? So I think this oak of Mamre is like representing establishedness, right? Like he's fully established, right? Like and only then the angels appear, right? So in some sense, like he's completed what he's there for, right? And then in the end, right, like um the angels that appear, right, or they grant him offspring, right? So there's the adulthood change or facilitates the birth of the next generation.
Something I'm thinking with this is you have I was thinking about the well-fed aspect, and also thinking about how, you know, you've got there's the physical diet, but then there's also the fact that you consume information. And so there's this thing of, you know, like, man doesn't live on bread alone, but also on all the words of God. And that you see that he's elevating matter for the angels, and he's submitting himself. He's being very peaceful. He's being very submissive. I would probably even say docile, or docility is probably the best way to describe it here, because docility is acceptance, but also teachableness. So it's kind of like a willingness to receive and sort of eat the words that are being informed onto you. So in many ways, it's kind of like they're serving each other. I'm offering you some physical food, and then you wind up receiving, since even heavenly reality and material reality are both emanated, he offers the material reality, and then he also receives not just spiritual information, but then also the potential for future physical growth for himself and his family.
Yeah, so I want to go through the text a little. So first thing that stood out after the oak is that there's 3 men, right? So we've been talking about 2 men last week. So now there's 3, which is curious. And then the man, they stand, right? So they're at a distance, right? And like he's running towards them, right? So he's making a movement, but he's making it in haste, right? Like there's an urgentness to it. And then he bowed down, right? So he's recognizing their whatever, like the fact that he needs to bow, right? Like, so their, what is it? Their exaltedness, maybe that's the right word. And then he's using the word, if I found grace in your eyes, right? So he's deferring to them, right? In a conditional, and is saying, well, like if the conditional is true, like I would like something from you, right? Like then I would like to partake, right? And so there's a not passing thing, right? And so it's interesting the way that this is phrased, right? So the angels don't come to live with him, right? And so he's wanting them to temporarily be in his house and bless him, right? So they leave something for him, right? Like, which is the promise of a child, right? And in some sense, right, like he's not even aware of what they're going to give him, right? So he's also like relating to the unknown, right? He's inviting the unknown to speak, or not even to speak, to find expression.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, this is a story of participation. He's saying, effectively, you know, look, if I have found grace in your eyes, and let me participate with you, right? Which would just let me give you something. I don't think there's any expectation of anything in return, because he's already stated he's already gotten the thing. He's saying, all right, you've given me grace, let me give you something as a mode of participation, right? Because you can always get the grace and reject it, which, you know, that's Tuesday for most people, I think. And that's the problem, is that here it's explicit. No, I see you, and I don't just want to say, you know, bask in the glory of your sight. I actually want to participate at the level of hospitality, right? And without imposition, which is why he, you know, starts out with this if statement. So it really is just about, let me participate with you in a way that will say I participate with others, right? The sort of standard fashion. Don't just be in the background, because you are anyway. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
kind of
Yeah.
definitional, right? So that to me is the more salient point. And the fact that he, will say get something in addition to the grace he's already received is, just a double bonus. I don't know. Like, it's not right. It's not expected. It's not anticipated. It's not something that is that is part of the participation, because he states up front, you've already given me something. Let me give you something in return. Right. And that's the proper sort of attitude. In fact, it's how a lot of the free stuff online works. Right. They say, well, if you give people free stuff, some percentage of them will want to participate more and pay you for not free stuff, which is true. Right. Like, I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. Right. But it's actually a business strategy for a bunch of people, not just online, but certainly the online crowd is very big on that particular strategy. You give something away for free, people will be more likely to pay you in the future for something else. And this doesn't have that in it. It's the inverse. It's, I've already gotten something from you, and I want to participate more. All right. I want to give back effectively because it's already been paid forward. So, and that's an interesting inversion. And it's interesting to note, we'll say, the inversion in recent times, in the age of gnosis, as I like to call it.
So in this fragment, also, so just talking about the kind of hierarchy, about people having different roles. Abraham is pretty much just a mediator between Sarah and the angels, because he doesn't do anything himself except just, well, not just, but he talks, he picks a calf, he gives instructions, and he shares a meal with the angels. And that's something that's, it kind of looks symbolic and liturgical in that sense. But the other thing is that, like, he's a mediator, and he's setting up his role as a mediator because he's putting Sarah in the tent. So actually he's removing her from the action. And one way to look at it is that he's doing that so that he has something to do. In another way, you can view it as, in this situation you have a bunch of angels and they're asking, where is the woman? Like, that refers to the previous chapter as well. And like, there's something in there for sure.
Waiters get tips, but usually the cooks don't. Like, there is that aspect of the mediator gets the attention, but also, like, they're kind of holding the stuff together. There's a funny, this thing of, like, the participation with the higher and kind of recognizing the thing that's above you. There's this funny little parable that I heard. So you imagine there's a medieval peasant, and he hears that the king of his province is going to be coming through on carriage, and the peasant is extremely poor. Crops failed and everything. All he's got really to his name is just, he's got his little hut, and then he has a little bag of dried rice, and that's pretty much all he has. And he thinks, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to see if I can bug the king and ask him for some alms. So he goes and he times it when the king is going to come through. He chases the carriage, and he goes and he gets the king's attention. And as soon as the carriage stops, the king puts his hands out and asks the poor guy for alms. And so he says, well, I'm not going to deny my king, but I was going to ask him for money. But he goes and he opens a little bag of rice, and he puts one grain of rice in the guy's hands, because they think, well, like, this is all I have left to eat, so this is about what I can spare as one little thing. And then the king says thank you and goes on his way, and he goes back home. Like, that was such a weird thing. And then later on, the king sends a servant, like, with guards and everything like that, and they show up at the guy's little hut, and they present him a gift from the king, and it is it's a little gold nugget, the same shape, size, and weight as the grain of rice, and says, thank you for the alms that you gave to our king. This is your recompense. And the peasant thinks to himself, why didn't I give him the whole bag?
Yeah, and also I know Christopher and I were talking on navigating patterns last night, because he was nice enough to save me from being all alone. And one of the sort of themes was, how do we understand hierarchy? And this is proper hierarchy, right? And so there's different ways to look at it, right? You can say the highest descended from the highmost place and was walking in the middle place, the earth, right? And the mediator is the head of house, so he's the highest on the place of earth, right, in the middle place. And he again wants participation. Hey, you're here, let's participate in the way we do in this middle space, right, where I am. And then you can look at him and Sarah sort of quote below him, right, in that way. But then you have to realize that it's kind of explicit in here, right? Like, take a fine meal and knead it and make some cakes, right? And so she's the mediator, because we went over this before with refinement, right? She's the mediator she's the head of those things. And like all of these characters, if you will, it's a bit of a banal way of speaking about it, but I guess I'll have to go with that, has a role. And that role is important. And if any of those roles are broken, this doesn't happen correctly. And if it doesn't happen correctly, bad things happen. And that's the more important and interesting message, is everybody has a part to play. Everybody has like a specialty or an area where they can contribute, we'll say, even if it's not their specialty, in that moment to the best to the best outcome of the group, right? And so, like, I hate accounting. I'm actually very good at it because I'm detail oriented. So sometimes I have to do the accounting. Not a specialist at accounting, but I can do it quite well, right? If I settle down and do it. And so sometimes that's my role, right? It's not my role all the time. It's not my role often. It's not the role I prefer, right? But sometimes that's the role. Why? Because the proper instantiation has to be there. And a lot of people confuse, will say, the person just sitting around, all the time, quote, doing nothing, but who is the face of hospitality, as being worthless. But to Castle's earlier point, the waiters get all the money, right? And the cooks actually do the most, quote, work, right? But the most important work is done by the mediator in the restaurant. That's the most important work. That's why it is that way. And you can't be all things to all people, and certainly not all at once. And so understanding roles is important. And then once you have roles, you need mediation. It's also called middle level management, by the way. Right. But all of that is important, and it's all actually encompassed right here in this story. Is what is your role? Where do you belong? The mediator, and maybe they're a bad mediator or less than optimal mediator, or maybe the mediator is just mediating something you don't understand because your role doesn't allow you to see, right? Like, cooks often don't understand why waiters get all the money, right? Until a cook goes out and talks to some of his patrons, and they, well, I mean, this food is terrible, or you overcooked the fish, or whatever, right? And then they're like, yeah, I'll stay in the kitchen and take less money, thank you very much. I mean, I know people that has, I've seen that happen, in fact, but I know people that's happened to, or who are cooks, we'll say. So it's kind of important that you kind of recognize, oh, well, that's not my role, and that's okay. There is a proper role. The mediator, for better or for worse, is doing what they're doing, and maybe they're doing a better job than I know, because I'm not good at mediation or something. And that's all encompassed in that one little story. It's not a very little story at all, but it's also very super pragmatic.
So Mark touched on something that I think is really important, and it's like the three are already there, right? So all that's happening is they're getting a seat at the table, right? So it's recognizing something that exists and accounting for it, right? It's like, okay, like now you get to partake in what's happening, right? And that changes what is happening, right? Because like if you include, in some sense, like this the thing that brings you, right? It's like, I'm now thinking with with the story of Adam and Eve, right, and eating the apple, right? I think this is the proper way of integrating the apple, actually, right? Where it's like, okay, like you're there, like now you get to partake, right? You get to be integrated, right? And now we established a new equilibrium, right? And so like now we have a new tree, right? And The tent was mentioned, right? So this happens under the tree, right? And the woman is in the tent, right? Or we already made the kitchen analogy, right? Also because she's cooking, right? And it's like in the kitchen the sausage gets made, right? And like, there's also a reason why the kitchen is not exposed to the people in general, right? In the restaurant, right? Because there's the processing of things, right, is usually reserved uh, to be out of sight, right? Because it's like it's in like a sacred place, right? Like it needs to be shielded in some manner, right? For example, right, like you don't want to have the cook deal with the annoying customer. Like that's a reason to shield that place, right? um, and yeah, so I want to correct Gustav. Like Abraham has a role as a host as well, right? Like he's hosting, right? So he's and I just wrote down like someone has to be the face, right? So he's facing that which comes in or presents itself, right? And the being of the face has a mediating quality, right? But it also has like it does its own thing independent of the rest of the body, right? So there's these dual roles, right? And we were talking about the whole home in the wall, right? Which also had like this dual quality. So like I'm seeing the dual quality here as well. So going back to the text, like a thing that stood out to me as well is we're getting back 3 here, right? So here we have 3 measures of meal, right? And they get kneaded together and they become one, right? And then you have 1 calf and it becomes 3 things: cream, milk, and the meat itself, right? So there's something there where the one aspect is bringing things together and the other one is separating them into aspects. And then like it's really interesting that the number 3 already appears here. Like that is really curious. And yeah, some people were like the Trinity is not. It's like I don't know. um Yeah. So, oh yeah. So the other thing is right in the tent, right? The tent is under the covering of Abraham, right? So there's like he's under the covering of the tree. There's a covering of Abraham, right? And so there's these 2 spaces that are embedded in each other, and they build a relationship to each other, right? And I think when we're talking about establishment, right, like that's maybe what we can call establishment, right? When these 2 layers of reality or something that they start falling into communion, I guess. And in the last line on this page, it's talking about a year, right? So like I've been looking at Genesis in some sense also as defining things, right? And so it's like I think in some sense the year gets defined as the cycle of offspring here, right? Like in a year, like in a year the offspring comes. So that's what a year is, right? Like the time within which you get offspring.
I just want to add a quick contrast just to the previous, since he actually kind of prefaces this, that this chapter is in contrast to the previous one about the fallen angels and hosting those by kind of the rebellious behavior, the agitated behavior, that you have, we talked about Manoah and his wife and how there was kind of an agitation in their thing. You had the flexibility of the host with the most here, he literally bends to them. And then asks the question and then starts providing a series of things that also they can choose from. He doesn't say you have to eat the bread. They don't eat the bread. They only eat the meat, right? But he just presents it, and then it's at their discretion to be able to eat the things, which is pretty much all just the exact reverse of all the things that happened with Manoa and his wife, even though his wife was really trying. And you have this thing of also the docility of he's waiting for their command, and then he's accepting everything that they say. So he doesn't question at all, like, oh, you're going to, have all it's his wife who laughs and then says, oh, in my age, am I going to do, am I going to have a child and everything? And that chapter also has a really funny ending too, where like, she gets called out for laughing, and then she says no, and the chapter literally ends with no, but you did laugh, and then it just moves on to the next thing. And but there is that thing of like, okay, I'm going to now, instead of being docile and still, to Mark's previous point of like, the host at a restaurant is just standing there, like they seem to not be doing anything, but also they're establishing space, that they are kind of the pillar that's upholding the tent in a certain sense. And you have her where she's kind of stirring a little bit over the news that she's just received. She's unstable, and there is something about that agitation that is also kind of repulsive to a good guest. Like, if you ever go over to somebody's house and people are arguing or whatever sort of stuff, it's like, no, this is ridiculous. I remember there was a story about one of those recently canonized saints that she would see her guardian angel all the time. And that there was a thing where she was invited to an event, and she was in this whole flurry, as sometimes ladies do when they got to get their hair and their dress and everything's got to be just right. She was in this whole thing, and the angel actually said, I'm not going to talk to you for this amount of time, because that was too much. Like, they would talk every day openly, and like he just said, no, for this amount of time is the amount of time that we can't talk, because your agitation was too much. You can't host me in your environment anymore. Until this cycle has gone through. And but yeah, so there is that, and then you have this whole thing where Sarah's in this agitation, and she's not accepting what they're informing, and then she also tries to take it upon herself to, oh, maybe this is how I'm supposed to facilitate the thing that they said they were going to do for me. And then she shortcuts and then creates this whole complication with Ishmael and all this other stuff.
Yeah, so that's also interfering with the mediative role of Abraham, right? Because she's stepping over that mediation. And
she's not raising food. Like, her place, like the having the baby is raising food, and like her place is raising food, and then she sidestepped that and decided to become the manager or whatever.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I like this idea about the guest choosing the food, right? Because like when you invite the alien in your house, right? Like, you don't know how to establish connection, right? So you need to offer so that they can make the connection by themselves voluntarily, right? Because like, how else would they enter, right? Like, and so like this repulsion aspect, right? Which basically means that you're offering something that they can't partake in, right? Like, and it even gets excluded. So I actually had an experience today where that happened, right? So I was walking through like a flea market, and there was this woman. She was like cleaning up, and she was putting her clothes in a box, and she lifted the box, and the bottom fell out. And I just saw it happen, and I'm just turning around, and I just smile at her, right? Like, I don't say anything. I'm just smiling at her, right? And she felt the connection, right? Like, she smiled as well. And then she grabs herself, right, or something, right? Because she feels the need to say something, right? And so what she says to me is, I'm sorry you had or to see that, or it would have been better if you didn't see that. I was just like blown away. I was like, wait, you want to deny me this experience? You want to revoke it? And I'm like, like I saw her naked, right? Like I saw her in her failure, right? Like I saw her uncovered, and it was too much for her, right? And so she needed to like revoke the whole happening spiritually from me, right? So that I like so that she would have distance from me. I was just like I told her, like, you just made my day. Like, why would you deny this to me, right? Like, like what? Like we had this moment, right? Like I saw it in your eyes, right? Like why are you trying to change it, right? Like why are you trying to change the nature of what occurred, right? And I think what Casa was talking about with the laughing, right? It's like there's a hosting in the sense of presence, right? But then there's also a hosting in letting it affect you, right? And I think the hosting in the letting it affect you, right? Like letting it work on you, like the laughing, right? Is is like a release of that tension, right? But it's a subversion, right? Or an is it an aversion, right? Like it's at least a turning away from your person, right? Because you need to let off steam, right? Because the light is shown too intensely, right? Like like for example with Sarah, right? Like she's like, well, you're gonna carry a child, right? It's like, okay, like that's some intense responsibility, especially at her age, right? So it's like how do you deal with that news apart from the fact that like it seems impossible, right? Like how do you receive that news, right? And so like I've been thinking about receiving love as such, right? Like we kind of like forget that part, right? Like when someone loves us, that like it needs to land somewhere. Like we need to host that love in some sense so that it can manifest what its promise is, right? Like what it's there to deliver. um and you can see how you can frustrate or even deny that process from occurring just like really easily.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of, I'm thinking about Christopher's title there, the graceful integration. Like sometimes somebody gives you a gift that maybe you don't want, but there's also there's graciously accept. Like I've been given food that I couldn't possibly eat. Like just there's dietary restrictions or whatever, but it's like thank you so much. Like this is a it will get eaten. It won't be by me, but somebody that I trust is going to probably eat this. I don't have to tell you all of that. I am grateful for because now I get to regift this, and like I'll also even be able to report back on how good it was once I get the feedback, right? I'm not going to claim that I ate it, but there is an aspect of graciously accepting something, or just that, like the docility is like receptivity or something like that. It's like this. Oh, I wanted to say the lower half, like of reality has to be flexible. Like that's if you're going to have something inform it. So you think of like trees or blades of grass bending in the wind rather than being super stiff and then just snapping in half or something like that. There's a necessity of that flexibility. Or even if you think of the case of teachers, they say, oh, they're molding young minds. It's like that implies like wet clay, like something that's actually moldable, and that isn't already fired in the kiln or something like that. And then also just to tie that into like even the word weakness comes from a root that means flexibility. So that thing of like power is perfected in weakness. Like that actually is receptivity and flexibility.
When a metal gets weak, it's bent too much, right? And so now it can't sustain with strength anymore, right? So and yeah, one of the things that I was missing in these chapters is like, yeah, you have the grass that needs to bend, right? But there's also something like taming animals and breaking them, right? So there's a way where, well, I guess cultivation would be the word, right? And the other part would then be like, I guess, like indoctrination or something, right? Where both there's like a generative element and an imposing element, right? And they both need to occur, because sometimes things need to break, right? And sometimes they need to bend to take a different shape, right? Or to be repurposed or something, right?
That actually reminds me, I was thinking this week about the difference between submission and surrender. And so there's this thing of like, oh, well, if you're surrendering. So I was trying to kind of reconcile this thing, because, surrender is like when you're beat or something like that. In the case of like a horse, like, okay, the horse kind of surrenders. It's like, okay, fine, I'm going to stop bucking or whatever. As opposed to an animal that's just like, okay, yeah, like I submit, like, let's go for a walk or whatever. But there's an aspect of when we were talking about like the interior microcosm. I think that's probably going to be coming up again shortly. The thing of like, okay, the interior microcosm is also where the stuff starts to kind of ripple out. That there's an aspect of, there are certain things that actually aren't just going to submit, and you have to surrender them. So there's certain things that it's like, well, I can't, like, oh yes, I'm going to submit in politeness to whatever sort of thing, but there might be something really contrary to your nature, like something about somebody that you just can't possibly stand, that you're also like, you're subduing that in a sense that you're making it surrender, like you're breaking that internal horse that keeps on bucking, so that you can do both on the interior scale. If the earthly side of you, or like the natural side of you, is not submitting to the principle of, okay, we're going to be peaceful and docile to this person, then you do have to kind of break that horse and make it surrender, in order to actually make cooperation possible.
So there's another side to surrender, right? So like, what's the act of surrendering, right? Like, it's presenting your sword, right? Laying it at the feet, right? So what does that mean? Well, like, that means that you lose control over your sword, right? Like the thing that you wield with your right hand now has a different hand moving it. And so like, it's like outsourcing, right? But it's not in your will, right? It's in another will. And so like you like I just had this, well, I had the same thought this week, but I was using humiliation as the frame, right? And like, in order to be humiliated or to be humble, right? Like, you need to have the other, right? Where like the higher that you're humiliated under, right? Like it doesn't make any sense without, like, I'm just going to use the word aura, right? Emanating from above, pushing you down. like there's an imposition, because how else do you get down, right? Like how, like, what does down even mean, right? Like, down is in relationship to something else, right? So yeah, like I was trying to focus on like what are the aspects, right? So like I was saying, like, okay, you have to look up, right? Because in order to be under something, right, you need to raise it up. You need to let it be above you, right? But you also have to go down, right, in order for the other thing to get, well, the information, right? And like, that's the surrender aspect that you were talking about, right? Like, where it's like, okay, your will now gets to dictate.
And I like the association also with the humiliation thing, because that's, I mean, humus means earth or dust or something like that. And I was thinking, somebody asked me a question about a project they were working on, and I was thinking about, they have, for casting molds, they have like metal powders. And so the whole thing of like contrition is to be crushed or powderized or something like that. And that in order to melt that, you don't have to expose it to heat or light as long before it completely melts down into the consistency you want it. So if you have those pellets, or you have the powder of aluminum, or bronze, or whatever you have, you don't have to heat it for as long. It immediately, depending on if the thing is preheated well, it'll just liquefy, So you don't have to have a block and then just keep on hitting it from all the different angles and move it around for so long. It's just it's already ready, and then you put it in the mold, and it's flexible enough. But it needed to be in this very low configuration in order to be kind of transmuted up into the higher shape that was prepared for it.
Yeah, and that requires some sort of uniformity, right? And some sort of purity as well, right? Because else it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's like a property of metals, right? That they can do this. Like it's no surprise that you use this example of metals, and then there's this whole thing with metalworking being the skill given by the angels and stuff, right? It's like shaping the world according to your will, but then also you're being given something with which you can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, because the metal becomes an extension, right? Like it becomes the tool, and then it's like it becomes I don't know, extending. So on this page, yeah, so the above is coming down, right? Like in some sense, it's judging Abraham, and so like it's also judging whether it's worthy of the offspring in some sense.
Yeah, I mean the focus here is on the mediation, and most of the past chapters about mediation. They've only used, we'll say, 2 images, right, and 1 action or process or whatever, however you want to think of it, as they're doing here. But then, of course, at the end of this chapter, they'll use the third thing. Right, that third thing that emerges as the result of the proper interaction of the 2 things, we'll say, not to be confused with the incorrect and reprehensible Hegelian dialectic. You've got 2 things here; they're not opposites, right? It's just a transformation from one state to another as the result of a proper action, like washing feet. So you're using the water to separate the things that cannot be integrated, right? And that is a form of refinement or purification or rectification. And yeah, we're going to get into this idea of rectification versus renewal, which is going to be fascinating. And so that's actually really important, is the proper first encounter with the stranger, as it says on this page, right? Like there are certain things you're supposed to do which may be related to hospitality, right? But like you're supposed to do them. Well, you can call them hospitality or not. It doesn't really matter. Like there's a proper thing to do when you encounter the stranger, and that is to give them some form of care. All right. In this case, it's washing the feet. I would imagine other things would be acceptable based on circumstances. Probably always also washing the feet, unless of course you have shoes, in which case it's taking shoes off, right? So there's all these rectifications that you can do, and then of course, washing is taking something away. You're taking the dirt away, and then there's the offering, right? And it's the first washing or caring in that way of separation and purification, and then the offering of the flesh, right, to the separated items that puts them back in shape and gives them a proper relationship with that below and above. That's what the arrows signify on the lower diagram, and that is right. There's no question marks either anymore, right? There's question marks everywhere else, not there, as the result of all the work required to realign those pieces, right? Reintegrate the guest through the mediation with the world, right? And even in this case, keep in mind who the guests are, right? But like this is still required somehow. which is, you just chalk that one up to mystery, because I think it's the best way to handle it, right? Not try to sort of understand it or dissect it in that way, but to just understand there is a mystery about how washing the feet would help in this situation. Like, what are you doing, right? And why the offering would help, because it's a little weird, right? Do you even eat, bro? Right? You don't eat you don't eat the cakes, so that's fine. And then there's this alignment that happens as the result of that mediation, because that's what mediation is. It's this attempt at alignment.
I want to add something that came to mind with the diagrams. So you have the fact that meanwhile Abraham is at least offering, but most likely did wash their feet. You also have Sarah in the tent mediating the flour, vulgarizing it with water, not the same water, obviously. But you have this kind of difference of, okay, you're taking powder or whatever sort of thing. You have the one level of mediation is removing it from the higher thing, from the guest that they're hosting. And then that is just kind of going down into the earth or what have you. But then you also have this thing of adding the water to the flour and then kind of kneading that together and kind of vulgarizing or materializing that thing, which they don't accept. They accept the other thing. They accept the offering of the flesh, right? But then to kind of tie this into like the manna in the desert, where, that you have the emanating down of the powder, and then they gather it up and they add water and materialize it, and then that is the kind of thing that they have. And just thinking, well, these guests didn't eat the bread, but we can assume that the bread got eaten, and the bread probably wouldn't have gotten cooked if not for their presence either. I mean, somebody would have cooked bread, but in that instance, maybe they weren't going to be making bread or that meal. So there's also the benefit of the hosts being able to partake in all the stuff that the guests weren't eating anyway.
Yeah, so I want to frame it as a little bit different, right? So it's like, what is the role of the guest, right? Like, what's the function that they perform, right? And so like you said, Castle, right? Like they initiate something, right? Like that wouldn't have happened without them, at least in that manner, right? But yeah, so they're in some sense, right? Like we've been talking about, well, they might eat this food and not that food, and all of these things, right? So they're like filtering, right? Or they're purifying the activity that is happening at the foot of that tree, right? And they're making some things, right, that they eat, they raise them in significance, right? Like they get to partake in the higher, and the other things, right, that they don't like or whatever, they get pulled down. And so it's like, what's that? Well, that's relevance realization, like literally, right? Because the things that are relevant get highlighted by the interaction, right? So like Mark is like, well, mediation, right? It's like, yes, the mediation, right? So the participation in the hosting of the principle, right, is the thing that is showing the relevance of things, right? And so only in the act of mediation that appears, right? Like, because you can't presume, which is also a fault that a lot of people make in hosting, right? Like they presume what their guest wants, but like if you walk with presumptions, right? Like you're gonna pervert the expression of the principle, and you're not gonna host it correctly, right? So like you're not gonna get a proper offspring of the principle.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good observation, and just as I think it's an important segue. The implication there, Manuel, is that relevance realization is only a function of distributed cognition. And actually, I kind of like that idea. I think we'll have to explore that more, since relevance realization is still to some extent a dragon of the apocalypse for us. But I think maybe that resolves it rather nicely. I mean, not not in a way we'll say Dr. Vervaeke would like, but or maybe anybody else, but also maybe correctly, right? Is it without the mediation, you can't even find the proper relevant thing. That's why you try a bunch of things. You try the cakes and the meat, right? And you see what sticks and what doesn't, and then that is how the relevance happens. And then it's in the offering that things become aligned and relevant or properly oriented, and because I think that's much the same thing: relevance, realization, proper orientation. But it only happens as a result of the interaction of, we'll say, many players, right? So that distributed cognition, that distributed participation, all participation is distributed to some extent, is what manifests the realization of what is most important.
So I would correct that, right? Like we said roles earlier, right? So the interaction of multiple roles, right? And like maybe you can do all these roles by yourself, right? Like in a lower fractal layer, right? Because like in some sense, right? Like the relevance of what Sarah is doing while she's cooking, right, is well personal to her as long as she properly surrenders, right, to her husband, and thereby to the guests as well, right? Like through his mediation, right? So on her level, there's a way, right? But like it's always connected, right? Like it's always integrated in and under the higher, right? And I think this aspect of surrendering, right? Because the guest gets to dictate, right? Like that's the implication here, right? The guest gets to decide the participation that he's having, right? And from the guest flows what is relevant and not, right? So I think the aspect of the other, right, having a say, right, and you could say like you could reduce that to a purpose or something, right? Like so the purpose gets manifested in a bodily configuration, right? Which also is not an individual, right? Like it's multiple parts working together, right? And I think that's the thing that you're highlighting, Mark, where and it's not in a moment either, right? Like it's something that is across time, right? Because like it's under the what was the tree, right? The oaks of Mamre, right? Which are like literally the like a mature expression of whatever is happening under that oak, right? Um, so only then you can find the relevance, right? So there's all sorts of preconditions that need to be met, right? Like so you need to have a mature established something. You need to have the players in the role, right? They have to execute their role properly, and then together they can have a healthy embodiment of the principle, right? And then the principle can partake in the expression.
Yeah, I just want to sort of, I don't think it's a surrender issue, it's a submission issue, right? Sarah's already submitted to her husband, and therefore, in that submission, when he comes in and says, "Hey, do this," she's like, "Well, yeah, of course, that's my role, right?" She's already submitted to that level of
She's also
participation.
surrendered to him, like that's.
Well, I don't know how you would. I don't think so. Again, I wouldn't characterize it that way at all. Like, surrender is a very specific thing. There's basically no overlap. You can do either, maybe, but you got to kind of pick one. It's not going to be a both and sort of situation.
I see the both and as a necessary aspect of proper healthy surrender or proper healthy submission, like because you can surrender and without being submitted, right? Like your surrender is perverted, right? And you can submit but without
Submission's irrelevant in face of surrendering. Surrender is unconditional. Submission is not unconditional.
no, because if you're surrendered and you're not submitted, you need to be in prison. Like that's
maybe, but you can. Like, they're not connected.
Anyway, let's go back to the book. um yeah, so looking at the washing of the feet aspect again, um like in some sense it's like loosening, right? So when when we look at, well, if the principle gets to speak for itself or something, right? We have to let the hierarchy be reorganized in that manner, right? So you can see the washing of the feet as an invitation for that, or preparation, or maybe also like a purification, right? Because I also think that that's a way to look at it, right? Like the principle is purifying that which happens below. And so you can also look at it as the strange, right? Like, because well, they're strangers, right? Like the strangers announcing themselves at the door. They're moving in, right? So they're supposed to find fertile ground for expression. So that's like they're carriers
Also,
of a seed, right?
also the washing the feet here shows you like the proper use of what is like time mediation or flooding. Like you're washing the feet, you're like literally you're flooding the feet, and this is like the healthy version of the flood that has previously been almost exclusively destructive in nature, but this is the healthy version of it. So
yeah, so you have the kids pool in the pool, right, where you can't drown, right? Like, see it as that, right?
Yeah, I think what Chris was talking about is actually on the last page there of this chapter, right, where he talks about the regression, the rectification, and it's the
right, yeah.
mediation that allows water not to be a flood, like by definition, right? I'm sure Manuel knows more about that than we do, living in the Netherlands and all.
Oh man, now I'm gonna have to think that through. Okay.
Yeah, a dike is a water mediation technique, or sometimes they call it remediation, which is even funnier to me. It's not inaccurate. I find the word amusing. And yeah, I mean that's what it is, right? You're remediating the water, right, or mediating that water away from certain areas and into other areas in exchange for dry land, right? And hopefully the flood doesn't come, because if a flood comes in that set of circumstances, you're in real trouble, as they found out in New Orleans back when a hurricane hit, right? So you got to be careful.
So the interesting things with dikes, and like I might be wrong, but like I think they need to be wet, because if they're not wet, they don't maintain structural integrity, right? So the thing that they're supposed to keep out needs to be part of them in order for them to fulfill their proper role. But if they get too saturated, right, like then, well, they become mud, right, and then they flood. So it's a really interesting balance between, yeah, like letting the outside, right, like the thing that's supposed to be kept outside in, so to be part of who you are, but also if you let in too much, you can't be the mediator anymore.
It's mediation at all layers, right? There's fractal mediation for you right there.
Yeah, so yeah, so I actually was talking about, like, I actually have the notes here. So the marginal influence, right, is controlled or mediated, uh, right? That's what a marginal influence is. So it's
right. That's the rectification that Christopher was pointing out earlier, right? But again, it's better on the last page. Really goes into this better in the diagram, which I think is super important, right?
yeah. So then is that the fallen angels caused the flood waters, right? And so like I'm not liking the word causation, right? Like it's not completely incorrect, right? But like I would say it's a result, right? So there's like I've been thinking about pathways, right? And like where things inevitably end up, right? And like when you're on a path, like the path doesn't cause you to reach the end of the path, right? Like the path is just a means of propagating through a space, right? And you walk the path, right? Like you make yourself end up at the end of the path, right? So the path is not causal, right? But it is inevitable, right? Like it only goes to one place, right? Like it doesn't lead anywhere else than its final conclusion.
Something I'm thinking with that is I'm thinking like from the perspective of these fallen angels that like they have a final cause in mind. Like it's a very low final cause. But also and then just the aspect like I know I've kind of harped before and I'll do it again. The thing of like malice being choosing a lower good over a higher good, that's also your slippery slope, right? Is that it's constantly choosing the lower thing every single time also continues to bring things downhill. So you have a thing of, you know, you're standing under a principality that is constantly choosing whatever the worst thing is of two. Of at least if you had only a set of two, it would always choose the worst thing. So I do agree. It's maybe not necessarily like, oh, they were, you know, that there's a mediation involved. Like you have to accept and continue choosing to host that thing over and over and over again for these bad decisions to continue to pile up until you end up in the floodwaters. But there is also that thing where it's like, well, you know, this thing is only looking down. So if you continue to stand under it, then you're just going to keep on going down every step you take.
That's really amazingly put, Castle. And I think just with these examples as well of the fallen angels that cause the floodwaters, I think there's an interesting identification there that you can make that the fallen angels are the springs or the eyes of the deep that open up and flood the world. That you have these really low, dark perspectives at the bottom of everything. And then also the angels said to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, like it's kind of viewed as a consequence of Sodom and Gomorrah not being able to host the angels appropriately. But like that causation is also a little bit like tentative or not exactly clearly defined, right? It's like it's kind of like that thing of standing too close to God's light and then burning up. Maybe that's another way to put it. Maybe it's like you have this identity, this spirit, this angel that you're kind of attempting to host, or you're engaging in the procedure of hosting it, but you can't do it, and so that ends up destroying you.
Well, in Sodom and Gomorrah, there's an attempt to mediate, right? And the thesis there, if you will, is something like, well, if there's enough people here, then we can host an angel, right? And enough good people, I should say. So there's enough goodness here, then the hosting will work. But just because you try to mediate doesn't mean that it's going to work, right? And that's the more interesting part. Like, you know, because people are always in the age of gnosis, you know, trying to read these things as modes of engagement which allow them to solve a problem using some sort of a tool, right? And so if you see mediation as a tool to solve a problem so that God doesn't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, then you need to reread that story and realize that in fact it did get destroyed, because mediation is not an answer, right? And it's not that you shouldn't try, because you trying may doom the city but save you and your family. That might be important. I mean, it should at least be important to you and your family.
Yeah, so if you take the role of mediation, right, like you're othering in some sense, right? So that like removes the covering of the principality, right? And you can establish a new relationship to it, right? So like what Gustav was saying, right? Like you could replace wells with fountains, right? So like fountains are like temporary trees, right? So like because they're like a mediated thing, but it's sourced from below, right? And so like whenever the sourcing from below stops, it will fall because it's not held up from heaven. And like that's maybe, and that's just emergence, right? It's like, ooh, look, something emerged and it has an identity. It's like my identity is from this spring, right? Like from this fountain, like that doesn't have a place in heaven, right? So like it won't be hosting any angels, right? Like, or at least not angels from heaven.
There's that mistaking emergence for emanation thing, where it's like, have you ever had that thing where there's like, you can hear water on a window in like an unknown place, and you're like, oh, is it raining outside? And it was just the grass sprinklers or something like that. But it's just like, it seems like it was raining, and from your limited perspective, it might as well be, because you see water coming down, But no, it was all false. And then the point about the mediation is that Abraham is still being a good host, even though he's actually no longer in his element. That he goes, and even like, if the folks at home want to go and reread just these two sections of the part, because right after the thing with Sarah being told that she did laugh, it leads straight into the Sodom and Gomorrah thing. And it's actually really comical, how Abraham keeps really trying to intercede for the city, and he keeps saying, like, it's funny how he qualifies all the statements too. It's like, if I found grace in your eyes, one more time, please. Then like he just keeps on going. It's just like, he keeps asking. He asked like 4 or 5 times at least, and but he goes and he's asking, okay, if there's 100 people. Okay, but what about like 75, 50? Okay, 10. Like, if there's 10 good guys, because he knows that he's going to talk it. He's seen the city. Like, he knows it's not good. And then it actually says, because the people that are there are then pretty much trying to molest the angels, essentially. And it actually says, every man to the last man in the entire city was gathered around Lot's house. So every single person in that entire city was a rapist, without exception. And it's like, okay, nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. But to remember that it's like, these angels are coming in because they're the good guys. Like, they are representing emanation. So they're representing light. So they're informing about, okay, here's some good news. And then also they're able to mediate, like, okay, yeah, we can also have mercy on these guys or whatever. Like, we can change things in a certain way. But it's like, okay, we're going to come in, and depending on what the conditions are like that's going to wind up manifesting different depending on how you're engaging with it. That if you don't have the flexibility, or you lack submission or something like that, then you will get knocked over by the wind. I had actually, there was an interesting thing. It was kind of weird, but Mark had said that it's the age of woo again, and I believe it is. It never stopped being the age of woo, but I think especially now, that there was a thing. A buddy of mine told me that he had a lunch break coming up, and he was working late, and he knew that it was going to be super, super slow. So he decided to use his lunch break to run back home to pick up his Bible so he could do some light reading while he was just sitting there at work for another few hours. And I thought, oh, that's a very virtuous thing. And he said he went home and he asked his sister, who openly practices like Wicca and stuff like that, to hand him his Bible. And in front of the entire family, she went to grab it and burned her hand and dropped it and like audibly yelled a swear word. She went to grab it and just hand it to him like it was nothing. And she actually burned her hand on the Bible. And then he ran out of time and he had to go back to work. But like the whole family saw it, and it's like, and he was like, it's just leather, it's just cool to the touch, but it's like, yeah, there's that thing of like, depending on your receptivity, like the way that manifests when you engage with it is drastically different.
Yeah, so we were reading Romans 7, and Paul is just talking about, like, I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do, right? And at a certain point, he says that if you keep doing the thing you don't want to do, you're going to justify it in the eyes of the law, right? Like, you're just going to like pervert the law in order to give yourself allowance, and then the sin is gonna dwell in you, right? So it's gonna take seat, or and in there, right? Like this is what Peterson talks about. It's like, if you let the disease control your life. You don't know where you end and the disease begins, right? Like there's the sin takes on a different nature, right? Because it's automated. It's no longer recognized as a sin, right? So you're not contrasting, you're not consenting, right? And you need to be slapped out of that, right? Like you need to like drawn into a perspective where you can look at yourself and see the degenerate nature of what you're in, and and there's something there like I've been talking about this a bunch, and it's like the analogy that I'm making is like you're in the water, right? Like it's the water you swim in, right? And you need a hand outside of the water to drag you out so that you can judge the water for what it is, right? and and so like that's not a thing that you can do by yourself, right? Like you need to have an external thing slap you out of the orbit. Like I've also been thinking about orbiting and like even with moods, right? So like for example, like this woman that I talked about, right, with her denial, right? Like she could have captured me, right? Like I could have consented to her framing, right? And then my mood would have been destroyed, right? It's like because I'd live out that rejection, I'd live in the rejection, as opposed to no, like she's wrong, right? Like I'm not rejected, like she's rejecting Christ, or like she's rejecting the communing that that was offered there, right? And so like that's not related to me, and I can still partake in that without needing her to whatever, like if she doesn't want to partake, it's fine, but like I can still have the blessing that was there. Oh yeah, and so like I wanted to respond on the dialectic aspect a little bit, right? So because in some sense what is happening here is like there's a manifestation on earth, right? And so there's like heaven is speaking, and then it's trying to get a body, right? And either that body is finding grace or it's not finding grace effectively, right? And then more can happen, right? So there is a going back and forth, but I think the problem with Hegelian dialectic, right, or at least the way that it's practiced or used, is that it's never exiting the realm of ideas. It's just in the realm of ideas. We're having this back and forth, but it's like no, like you can only have a back and forth with reality affirming or denying the reality of the idea, right? The principle that needs to find expression. So going back to the text, so I'm contrasting the cause that I have highlighted here with scent, right? Like so, scent is actually relating to a will, right? That is uh, exerting itself, right? Um, and so they they are actually causing the destruction, right? like so it's interesting that the causality is reversed, right? Because like being sent is actually a causal, right? Like it's in an imposition that is manifesting a change, while the fallen angel is basically only through worship or something, right, able to find expression and therefore like having a perverted way, right? Because it's ultimately pointing back to Earth. Um,
It's kind of like a bunch of termites eating a floor versus just slamming it with a sledgehammer or something like that. Where it's just like it's the unification or the expression of a point onto the thing, as opposed to just a bunch of things disintegrating it.
so there's this saint in the Netherlands, Willibrord, I think, and like he came from England, to reintroduce Christianity, and so like I saw his hammer, right, and his hammer was used to break the temples that were here to other gods, right? Like it was a really small hammer, but it's like yeah, like that's the heaven coming down, right? Like breaking the stone, breaking the chains, breaking the prison, and the tradition. So yeah, so what he's talking about here, right? So the world is subjected, right, by fire or by water, right? Like that's basically what it says. So there's two ways that the world can change form or something from an external imposition, I guess.
And I mean, this isn't so much maybe about the grace part, which this whole chapter seems to be about, but fire can represent a cleansing as well, right? Like a purification. What's the word for it? It's like when you
Sterilization.
take. That's not quite what I mean. What I mean is that you take a city of 1,000 people, and then you kind of put it through a trial, and then the one strongest guy survives, right? Like that's a kind of fire, because you end up with the best part of something.
Well, that's
And
purification.
Like a crucible
Yeah.
or something like that.
I suppose, but there's a way in which it also elevates that which is left, because previously it was kind of mixed in with everything that was there before. So you get this poetically quite a lot in the Bible about how the priests need to be cleansed, because priests are like silver, so it kind of gets tarnished, and then you need to wash it every so often. And that's a kind of washing, but also you get all of this crap in iron and so on, and you need to like burn it away to get rid of it, kind of.
But that's
And
specifically with
that
metal,
has to do
right?
with. Yeah, it is. That's also another point. Yeah, but it just has to do with the thing I was thinking about how you kind of need to let go of quite a lot to get even a little bit like higher in some sense. And how it's like you shouldn't have like 50% of your population be priests or something. Like you only need a tiny amount, and then you can take like there's this idea of like the Roman Empire becoming the Catholic Church, which has come up, right? It's like the Roman Empire kind of died in a way, and then that which was good was left over. So you can say that in a way it was kind of it was burned by fire, and then the golden part remained, or something like that. So I guess the fire and brimstone is just I'm trying to be more negative towards it, instead of like trying to just justify it by saying that, oh, it's a good process anyway, if that makes sense.
So when we're talking about metals, right? Like, and we were talking about weakness in metals. The way that you remove weakness is by applying heat. All right. So the heat will reorganize the molecule or the atoms in their what's it called, the structure, the crystalline structure. That's the word that I was looking for, right? Um, and so like the reason that it becomes weak is because the crystalline structures often manifest in layers, right? And so these layers they have movement, and so like if you break certain configurations, right, like this movement becomes easy, and then like it loses structural integrity, uh, which is also an interesting way to think about integrity. And yeah, so the words that I had for what you were talking about, Gustav, or at least associated with, is like the fire evaporates, right? So that's also a purification. It disintegrates, right? So like it destroys structure and also explodes, right? So there's an explosive element where you just lose you lose any form of union, right? Like because you're particularized. Um, and on the left hand side, right, with the regression, we have atrophy, right? So some things, if you don't maintain them, they atrophy. You have overgrowing, right? So there's something else that supersedes that which is there, right? Like it takes over. And there's forgetting, right? So it like it's just the losing of sight, or the losing of awareness. Uh, that's ways by which time destroys or regresses you. And then when we look at the center part, right, we're talking about balance, and like he's putting washing feet and cooking food as contrasting things, right? And the thing that stands out there is like they're both work, right? Their effort, and so the effort put in is the mediating role, right? Like uh, yeah,
There's actually just one last thought that I have for this with the extreme space. I'm just kind of thinking about your intention, Gustavs, with the like kind of the negative side of the extreme light. I mean, just an obvious kind of image of that, and we could even imagine this pillar as that is Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. Like she is refusing to let go of the things that are being purged, and that she is remembering it, she's turning back towards it, and then sort of participating in the judgment that's happening on it, even though she herself was not one of these evil guys or any of these things. The fact that she reattached herself to it mid-judgment also made her collateral damage, which she was also warned about. So there is an aspect of the turning of this kind of not like the disobedience towards the angels who gave explicit orders of not looking back, but then also this thing of like, well, you've now just been exposed to extreme space, and that'll happen regardless of your participation at that point, because it's so far on the edge. Like you can't outwork that. You know, Abraham couldn't outhost it, and you can't not get attached to it when you get exposed to that light.
Yeah, and I think
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Castle. A lot of people get confused. I mean, Alex O'Connor got confused in talking to Pageau about this stuff, where it's like, well, God did this. It's like, no. God told you the rules, like the physics of the world work thusly, right? The angels aren't saying, we're going to punish you and turn you into a pillar of salt if you look back, because it's whatever day it is, right? It's like, no. If you reattach yourself to this mid-judgment, you'll get turned into a pillar of salt. Don't do that. It's a warning. It's not something that they have, we'll say, volitional control over. It's just built into the creation that is how things work. And people get really wrapped up about it. Another way to say that is it's reality, right? It's a non-optional part of reality that you have no control over. And I think Gustav, that's sort of what you're pointing towards. I mean, people tend to focus on, okay, well, you crush the ore, right? That's one set of refinements, and then you heat the ore, right? And the impurities usually drop to the bottom, or the stuff you're looking for drops to the bottom. It depends what ore we're talking about, right? And then you can separate them, and you get some purity level, blah blah blah, and then we focus on, see, now we've got the gold or the silver or whatever it is, right? But everything else that wasn't that, which is the vast majority of stuff, is now destroyed. And so, and people never look at the negative side, right? They never look at, well, sure, there's a refinement going on, but then there's a bunch of stuff that either gets thrown out or destroyed in the process of that refinement. And that's when people say there's no no creation without destruction. It's like, yes, that is true. That's right. It's more like in the process of refining to manifest, things are lost, right? Things are destroyed. Things are made worse in essence, because in order to refine the gold, in essence, you are also, quote, partially at least refining a bunch of other things because you're separating the gold out, but you're also not focused on those things, and so they become more corrupted. Now, because of the reality, the rules of the existence, the creation that we're born into, that often works out well for us, right? Because often in refining, you get to refine 2 or 3 or 4 metals instead of just the one that you're refining, right? Or you get them, somewhat refined, and then you can finish that refinement later. So that's that. I agree. That's all really important to sort of understand and make clear.
There's something. Well, if I could just quickly add, the thing with the also being able to eventually let go of the higher things. So, say if you're seeking after gold for a specific purpose, and then you need to use that then for another purpose, that because there's always waste in the refinement. Something that came to mind is I knew somebody that worked in an environment where they use gold to make stuff like lasers and high-end military tech and stuff like that, and they would use gold for that. And so they had gold trimmings that were the size of, like, practically like the size of mini pencils, that they were just throwing in the landfill because it was more expensive to actually take the gold and then go and refine it again, melt it down, and then use it for whatever the other purposes were. The things that they were making were so valuable that even gold had become like wood shavings, and that they were just throwing it in garbage bags and just throwing it in the landfill. It had no value at that point as far as they were concerned. So there's probably some actual landfills that just have like heaps of gold just sitting in trash bags, but alongside other junk like hot dog wrappers or whatever sort of things, like just because it was just worthless at that point. And of course, company policy, you couldn't just take it home or whatever. But yeah, just to that point, it's like even the high things, the things that were really good for a while, even that, there comes a point where if you want the higher good, then even that, it needs to be submitted or just completely thrown away if it doesn't conform.
Yeah, it might have been polluted gold, but like that could have been the case. That makes more sense. Like there's I saw this documentary about like getting things from car batteries, right? Like because there's a lot of gold in there too, right?
Mm.
So like they're actually like getting that gold back, right? Like through like really messy, intense chemical processes, right? And so this is the point that I wanted to get to, right? Like I'm pretty sure that refining gold takes like a lot of heat, like a lot more than iron or silver. Like in order to get the impurities out. There's the but the point being, right? You need to fuel the fire with wood, right? For the refinement, right? And so the more pure you want to get something, the more energy you have to put in, right? So there's something there where it's like the gathering of the energy in the one point, right? Like in the gold bar, uh, like it's somehow harboring everything that came together to produce the one thing, right? And you can even proceed the refinement into a ring on your finger, right? And then in that refinement, it can carry meaning, right? Like in some sense, like having all the physicality come together, like also connects it to its ability to carry meaning, right? Because if you just use a tin foil ring or whatever, like it would just be different. Like it would be different.
I want to quickly tie that to the oaks of Mamre. Just think that if you're feeding the fire with wood, then the gold bar is well fed, right? So like there is, and because of the refinement process and the attention that requires, like it's strength. It's not fat, right? Those are the kind of two offshoots of the being well fed.
And I wanted to point at the salt pillar, right? So like what is the relationship of a salt pillar with water. Right? So any water that touches the salt pillar is the end of the pillar. Like it's just like that's basically it, right? So like now you have to keep it dry. Like you just like that's
Well,
the only way.
also, it's the end of the water if the water is valuable.
Yeah, in order to create the salt pillar, you have to get rid of all time, right? And then that's what happens to her. Like she's right, like time no longer exists. She's a salt pillar now, right? All gone. And so yeah, this refinement is not free.
And also, right, like in Russia, they put salt in the earth to make it not produce crops, right? So there's an infertility element there, and you could say, right, like it's unable to sustain life effectively, right? Like that's the thing that happens, right? Like and you can see that with people who feel or are oppressed, because I don't think it makes a difference, right? Because like the implication is that you start self-regulating, so you start internalizing the oppression, right? And then you can't be alive anymore, right? Like you just get killed in your spirit.
Do you think we have time to do the next chapter?
Are you salty?
I'm craving that next chapter. We could be done in 3 weeks if we did the next chapter.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
are you trying to flood the space with too much information?
Yes.
Yes.
Because we're about to find out the world can't be destroyed by a flood anymore. So I can
Oh my
try all I
God.
like, and it's not gonna happen.
Well, we can give it a kickoff, right? Oh man, no, we can't finish it, man. Like I was just reading this and I was just like blown away by this bow thing, like this bow analogy just like made my day. And I already forgot it because all these other things made my day as well. Um, but yeah, I have set my bow in the clouds, right? And like I was looking up the word taunt, like when you string a bow, does it make a taunt, or like what's the word that you use there? Like it's stretch.
Maybe TAUT. Maybe that's the
Oh,
word you're looking for.
I don't know. Anyway, it like the bow exerts a pressure and it stretches the string, right? And so like the realization that I had is, so you have the bow, which is the stick, right? Which is that which holds the space, right? And now it bends, right? And then it the 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 string spans the space, right? And like now the string is that which takes the pillar, right? But it's held up by the bow, right? So there's like there's a microcosm or something, right? Like something inside of the bow, right? Contained by the bow, that is as a consequence of the bow being a pillar, right? And then like it's even more interesting because the pillar, right, can then move things, right? Arrows, right, which are instantiations originated from the pillar, right? And they affect other things, right? They pierce into external spaces. Uh, so I was like, okay, right. So if we're looking at God's bow and he put that in the clouds, right? It's like basically like the covenant makes like this string, right? Like this tension, and within this tension, a lot of things can manifest, right? And the flood doesn't happen, right? Because it's in continuous contact with with the bow, right, providing the tension. And I think like there's something there with um because you can look at it, right, like when you look up at God, right, like when you keep looking up at God, like he puts you in, like you're attending, right, like you're putting yourself, you're stretching yourself in that direction, and under that, right, under that condition, you have this space that is unfloodable. Like I think that's kind of being talked about.
Well, I mean, bow in this context is not bow as in bow and arrow. It's bow as in loop, right, or semicircle.
It's the same word in Hebrew.
It's a different definition of the same word, but most
No,
English
it's
words
the
have.
same word in Hebrew. Like
Why? I don't know any Hebrew. I don't care.
okay.
Hebrew doesn't use words the way English does at all, right? Or the way Dutch does, for that matter, or the way German does. Like the way words work in Hebrew has nothing to do with the way words work in we'll say modern Romance languages, and in fact all sort of modern languages. We don't speak that way. Just same with Greek, right? Like Greek, it's like the word meta has like 10 definitions in Greek, right? We don't have words with like 10 definitions in English. Every word in Greek has like 10 definitions. In Hebrew, it's worse because the formation of the letters has nothing to do with what word it is, right? And so they don't even have words the way we have words. But again, it's not referring to the weapon here. It's just referring to the connection of the arc or the loops that make everything bound together effectively, right, or connected in a way, and that's more, we'll say the what the English definition of the English word in this context would say. The problem with Hebrew is if you try to map words in Hebrew, you're going to find out really quick they don't have enough at all. Like it's not even close. But that's only because you're trying to map words and they don't actually have words in Hebrew. That's kind of a weird way to talk about it. It's very anachronistic because the combinations in our letters can lead to different words based on where you put the vowels. And so you could play that game in English too, by the way. I do that rather often. It gets rather fun. Also, not the way English works. So that's part of the problem when people do Hebrew translations. You can't do a standard translation language to language from Hebrew into English. It really doesn't work. The same with Greek. It's actually the same with ancient Greek. It really doesn't map because they just don't use letters in combination the way we use letters in combination. Our stuff is very, because Rome, basically, our stuff is very stultified and very structured compared to older non-Romance languages.
Well, I want to throw a bunch of words that are kind of connected just for the imagery sake. So the word, if I have the right one, kashuit in Hebrew, that is translated to bow here, can mean arch, arc, bow, rainbow, vault, slur. There's also kind of like a connection to other words that mean like showing obedience, bending, genuflection, things like that. But also things like nose or prow. So there's a lot of these images that kind of come in there. You could think of like the bow of a boat or something like that. But I do think that the curvature. I mean, I was even thinking like in English, you have the archery bow, you've got the bow of a ship, you've got the bend, you've got the fact that the words course and curse both mean kind of like a curvature, and then also there's a turning back element of this thing of like, okay, when it comes time for, especially he says that when I bring clouds up, then you'll see and I'll remember my covenant. So there is this sort of thing of, if you were to use the imagery of, because Matthieu is also saying that, arch also isn't bridge here. There's a connection between heaven and earth that is now been established, that becomes visible and rememberable from above and below. But then also, just if we were to take the bow and arrow thing, like it's pointed up. So it's, it's like, okay, if it were a gun, like the muzzle's not pointed at you anymore or something like that. So there is this aspect of the curvature is being kind of bent upwards as opposed to kind of curving back on you. So when things are, and he even justifies it. He says, well, I think it's actually a little bit later he mentions it, but this thing of that I'll kind of put it in the terms we've been using, like the interior microcosm of man is is bent from his youth. And so for this reason, I'm not going to allow the cosmic level to completely turn back on him because he's starting from a disadvantaged position or something like that.
But and it's also a non-linearity, right? Like the idea of the bow is a non-linearity. And the fact that you can, we'll say, derive, although ancient weapons didn't work this way, only modern compound bows, you can fire straight. But with a bow, you can't fire straight. It fires on a curve, which is really weird, right? Because it doesn't look like it should. But if you know archery, and I was in fact trained in archery for a little bit there, you have to aim higher than you're going to hit, right? Because it goes in a curve. So the curve of that part of the bow allows for the straightness of the string, but that doesn't cause a linear mediation, even though it looks like it should, because it is a linear mediation, right? And it's the deformation of the string that gives the power. But in this context, what he's basically saying is this non-linear way of connecting the world, right? This turning back. I'm not just gonna keep going forward with the creation and just keep creating. I'm going to remember, turn back, right? And that is a bridge, because it is a bridge, because it's a curve, right? And that is all the important, we'll say, elements of the symbolism, because what that means is that you're not being forgotten, and things don't just progress, which might be important nowadays, right? What happens when you do constant progression? You're progressive. Well, you destroy the world. Don't do that, right? You have to turn back. You have to remember. You have to revivify the past, et cetera, et cetera. I talked a lot about that last night, I think, on the live stream. So on navigating patterns. So that's the important part of the symbolism here, is this turning back, this idea of connecting in a non-linear fashion. And that non-linear connection gives you a bridge. Right, you wouldn't have a bridge if it were just straight from you all the way up to the creator. You wouldn't have a bridge. You would get burnt out and destroyed, and there would be nothing after that. And that's actually really important symbolism. It's probably why Protestants don't like symbolism, right there, because that sort of puts to rest a bunch of stuff they talk about. But that connection is important, and the fact that it's not linear is super important, and that's what this curve shape is doing in this way of mediation, because this is still in many ways about mediation, right? Because it's a bridge. A bridge is a mediator between two things.
I'm thinking of Moses, right? Where there's this thing of like the kind of mediating the remembrance, where God is saying, I'm going to just wipe out the Israelites because they keep rebelling, and then I'm just going to make a new nation of you, Moses. And then what does Moses do? Is he goes and he starts, interceding by recalling all of the other promises and saying, like, remember remember Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all of these things, and all the promises that you made. And then he kind of relents, and it says, the Lord felt sorry for the people, and he did not do what he said he might do. And so there is that thing of being able to say, okay, hang on, like let's look back for a second, and then let's use an earlier reference point to kind of curve back to. There's this is more recent, like 1930s, but there was a saint that had a private revelation that the only reason why Russia hasn't been wiped off the map is because people keep praying for it. And and it's like there's something really interesting there. You keep seeing this stuff, and it's like, yeah, if people weren't actually like kind of asking to recall certain things, like there's certain stuff that like that type of stuff hasn't stopped happening, you know. And people are there's an important aspect of remembering that you can mediate, and then also mediating with kind of a pivoting point of the remembrance of these things that is efficacious.
I've heard exactly the same thing about Latvia, actually. But the whole thing about the rainbow being this bow or arch in the heavens, it really reminds me of the firmament, which gets up at the beginning, right? That there's this arch that allows for the space for stuff to happen. And so if the rainbow is like a bridge, right? Is it this window in through the firmament so that you can see the upper waters, right? You can see the heavenly stuff above. You can see all the pretty colors and whatnot. I don't know, but it's a bit confusing to me.
I like
Well,
that
there's
thing of
all.
like seeing through it, like a bridge, a little bit.
I mean, there's also the thing that if you can see a rainbow when you're above it looking down, it will actually form a complete circle and not
Oh,
just
nice.
a half circle arch.
So I also want to like focus on that something that's arcing or that's bent is in relation to something that's straight, right? So then there's when something is bent, there's the implication that something is bending it, right? Like it's exerting something on the straight thing to have it bend. And so when we're talking about a window, right? Like I think that's maybe the window into the window. So if 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 you look at something being bent, right, like there's an exertion of force, right? So the bending says something about the external applying itself upon it, right? Like there's a way that you can see something of the nature of that which is applying the force. And I think that's how you get the window, right? Because like now you have like a fingerprint, right? Or like a way in which um, something gets form, right? Like or gives form. Maybe that's even right because in some sense it's speaking, right? Like there's a it's already left the mouth. Like you can't get to the source, but you can recognize the source work in it. And so it's also talking about every living creature, and it's also talking about the flesh, right? And it's also talking about flesh becoming food, right? And so, like, if you take the hunting metaphor, right? Like the bow is a weapon that allows you to capture meat, right? So, like, it's an access to refinement as well. Right? Like and also like I think also in some sense I think it's also a tool into justice, right? So like if you turn the bow on man, right? Like now you get to exert uh like you have a weapon for justice, right? And if we contrast it with the blood vengeance that Matthieu was talking about, um is like um if God gives this way, right, like this supernatural justice thing, right, like this bow is like the way into that, right? Like it's allowing for the covenant is allowing for the supernatural justice.
Yeah, I like the connection to the blood vengeance thing, because there is especially that of just kind of like the curving back of, you know, and you see this as well a lot of times. Like, it's a lot easier to teach somebody something when, especially if they're doing something that's incorrect. If what they're doing incorrect affects you and you don't retaliate on them, but like you just kind of correct them, and then they see like, oh, this had an effect on somebody, and then now let me go ahead and correct this. Like, especially if someone has like a very bad behavior or something like that. If you do kind of like, you know, the way Jordan Peterson describes like the, you know, the mom that doesn't flip out when she sees the mouse, but it's like, oh, if this person just kind of with their bad behavior just kind of spiritually flung a mouse on me, right, and like I point out like, okay, this is not okay, but also like you didn't hurt me, but this could seriously have, you know, an effect on somebody else, that like there's a little bit more of a motivation in a person that's actually paying attention to make that correction. But then also kind of tying in, like, you have the spies that you know, as their assurance to the prostitute that they weren't going to let her get killed, was that they invited blood vengeance on themselves preemptively, as a sort of promise that they weren't going to do that. And like that's exactly what happens in the Our Father prayer, right? It's like you're actually asking for condemnation if you don't forgive other people. And it's like you're basically saying, like they did, like if any of this happens to you, or actually to anyone that they're not forgiven by me, then let their blood be on my head. You know, like that's pretty much what's happening there. But you know, the implication is I'm ideally not going to have any blood on my head because I'm going to, you know, behave correctly. Whereas with God, like when he makes a promise, like of course he keeps good on it.
Yeah, I think it's worth also pointing out this rainbow idea that beauty in the sky as such is a reminder that the covenant has not been forgotten, right? And that is a way of God reconnecting with us and you know, making it explicit, we'll say. And I think you can extend that to, you know, all of beauty. Is a lot of talk of beauty will save the world, and it's like, well, not by itself, and it's not like you can manifest it, right? The beauty that saves the world comes from the parting of the clouds, right? Like actually explicitly here. It's not, you know, it's not hidden. Like that's where it comes from. It's right here in the text. This isn't that hard, right? And he does link it to grace and Sabbath here, right? Which again are just, it's all these symbolic pointers or indications of how things are, we'll say, properly connected in the, you know, in the world.
I
So
want to. Okay.
I want to add on to this, right? So like, when does a rainbow appear? Well, a rainbow appears when it rains, right? So what is rain? Well, a rain is the bringer of floods, right? As like, when does a rainbow appear? Not only when it rains, but when the sun shines through the rain, right? So there's an element, right, where it's like, hey guys, like I'm still there, right? Like these threatening clouds that are covering you, right? That are the bringers of flood, right? Like it might be a healthy flood, but it might also not be. There's like, no, beyond that, like I'm still watching you. I'm still watching over you, right? And so like there's a real symbolism, right? And like, yeah, Mark says, like that gets expressed in some beautiful manifestation of the awesomeness of nature, right? Where it's like because rainbows are huge, right? Like they are awe-inspiring, and like Gustav says, right? Like they're a covering of you, right? Like they're encompassing you, and it's like the being made visible of that which encompasses you, right? If we go back to what we were talking about, the thing that's ever present, right? But only when looking in the right way, right? Like when being matured, then it becomes visible, right? And we can host it properly, right? Like I think if we get that spirit in there, like I think that's important.
I want to add also with the thing of the bridge thing, that it looks like an arching bridge, but then also you look at how the colors are each uniquely identifiable as kind of you know, like a scaling down in a sense. So you have kind of the bridging of the colors that are kind of going, and they're connected to like the next identifiable color. It's not just jumbled up. It's not like a laser light show that's just pointing in a bunch of different directions or anything like that. But there's all these like intermediary steps that are kind of also demonstrating the bridge from another angle.
And in some sense, right, because that's the refraction of white light, right? So it's like it's the separation of something that is unified, right? And then like it also has this mediative quality, right? Where it's like it's a transition, right? Like there's a like the layering. They go into each other, right? Like it's like a stairs that you can climb in some sense as well. Like I wanted to respond. You want to go, Kirsten? No? Okay.
No,
Okay. So, Castle said you correct others, right? And I was like, yes, right, but you can only correct from a position of authority, right? But there's something else that you can do, and that's rectify the situation, right? So then you circumvent the other, right? And you're engaging with the purpose, right? And you're correcting the misalignment with the purpose. So there's two pathways to go forward, right? And so like one is giving a man a fish, right? Like so if you rectify the situation, you just give a man a fish. It's like okay, like like I'll just forgive you or I'll tolerate your transgression. Um, but if you correct someone and they are corrigible, right? Because like now you need to have a participation with them and a communion there, right? Then you're rectifying the crookedness in them that caused the misalignment. So that's like two pathways there.
Something that comes to, so I'm not sure if this is necessarily a disagreement. I think it's just to add on to the correction thing. So this was actually just yesterday. I heard this story that.
Are you correcting me?
I might be. We're gonna find out. I heard the story that Saint Francis of Assisi was going with another monk at one time, and they were traveling a long distance, and they only had one donkey so one of them had to go on foot, the other one could ride it. And at one point, he was actually technically the superior, because he founded the order, but he was riding on the donkey. He was allowed to by the other guy, but the other guy was actually from a noble family before he became a monk. So technically, he was of much higher social status. And he could tell a sort of agitation of the guy that was walking next to him, even though he said, yeah, of course you can ride. He could tell an agitation that, oh, this guy is starting to get a feeling like, oh, this guy's kind of lowborn, and why am I walking, and all this stuff. And that he could have said, oh, watch out, that's a temptation of pride or whatever. And then immediately then maybe they get into an argument or something like that if the guy isn't corrigible. But what he does is he gets off the donkey and says, my friend, you've been walking for a long time, and I also realize that you're of a much nobler family than I am, and so it's more right for you to do this. And by lowering himself below the other guy, it was almost like he got out of the sun, and then so like the light could kind of pierce down. So there was a position of authority that was correcting the guy, and he immediately saw it too, and he realized that it was a temptation of pride. But it was almost like Francis got his head out of the way and then went lower than the other guy to create contrast, and then it was the principle that was judging him, as opposed to the human being.
Right, and that there's a presupposition, right, of that principle being valued, right? Because that doesn't work if that principle doesn't,
right,
like it's not established.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think that is the correct way, right? So that would be right. Like if you just rectify the situation, right, and someone is attending properly, right, they're just going to see their mistake, right? Because like, oh, right, like it's going differently than I thought it would, right, and it's getting resolved. So I need to adjust the way that I'm participating. But like that only happens when there's like this humility there, and some sort of devotion to the purpose, right? Because like it needs to have a say, right? Like if you don't let it have a say, then you can just ignore it. Which is also an insight I had today, where it's just like, yeah, when you're just walking from thing that grabs your attention to thing that grabs your attention, like you can't let things have a say. Like you can't learn from them. They can't speak to you. So we're just
Can
gonna,
confirm.
yeah, we're gonna close it at this page. So um, yeah, someone needs to help me with a reflection prompt.
Just just to combine the two chapters to some extent is just the how are you a mediator or a bridge uh, for that connection, that bow between heaven and earth.
Okay, well, if everybody finds that properly inspiring, we'll be back in a bit. Please leave questions or suggestions so that we can reflect on those as well, and see you afterwards. Okay. Who wants to share their insight?
I think I had a surprising insight, which is that if the rainbow is this connection between heaven and earth in some sense, well, like we've been exploring a lot of different kinds of connections and mediations, like people and animals and institutions, whatever. So like, how is this a different kind of connection? And well, it seems to be that it's a connection that it's like a unity that doesn't have that much of an existence, or like its purpose isn't definitely isn't in itself. It's somehow serving that which is below it or something. And then I started thinking, so from our perspective, a rainbow is something like, maybe this is what it is, but like a vision above, a vision through the veil, right? So what does that feel like? How does that how how does that manifest the other direction? Like how does that feel to God? You know, having us see that rainbow. And like, what does that serve? And does it make a difference? You know, like this veil between heaven and earth. Is it like one directional? And how that works?
No, I mean the symbolism itself of the curve is not one directional, right? And the fact of the matter is that you can't know the perspective of God, right? It's pointless to speculate on that side, but the fact that it's made available to us and that it's our free will that allows us to either avail ourselves of it, right? We'll call it an affordance, right? That we're granted through beauty, or reject it is the important part. And so it's that's what emphasizes the importance of the participation as such. And that, I think, is where people get wrapped up, is they're not really appreciating and understanding the significance of participation. Because if you are inside and not experiencing the rainbow when it's there, then you're still participating. You're just not participating properly in that which is emanating from above and gracing the earth with its beauty, right? And so it's not a lack of participation, it's an incorrect participation.
I want to add, so I have some stuff that I think is going to also bridge what I have and what you guys were talking about. So this thing of the bridge as connection between heaven and earth. Earlier on, we talked about this thing of relevance realization and the importance of not presuming. So presuming is kind of taking a perspective that assumes evidence that you actually haven't observed, and then taking actions based on like a personal private perspective or something like that. And that this thing of using distributed cognition plus observation across time and then participation with the things. I mean, so you could see like, oh, if I'm hosting guests or if I'm running events, like, oh, what did people eat or not eat when they came over here? And then more of that next time, and then continue to just kind of calibrate things that way. And then also the importance of kind of the reverse of presumption is something like obedience, which is also listening. It's not just listening to the people above you, but also if you're hosting people that are below you, and if you're lending an ear to how they're feeling about the way that you're hosting, the structure that you're providing or the food that you're providing or whatever. But there is an importance of that kind of relationship that you're also building across these observations and participations across time. And so I really like the point, and I think that this is something that Matthieu has harped on many times before, is that people just don't look at the sky. That, he's out there and he's extremely connected to the cycle of day and night and everything. He can hear the animals come out, and when they do, he sees the sun rise and sunset and everything like that. Whereas, I mean, I've got artificial air and all these other things, and I've spent significant amounts of time indoors. But you have this thing as it's a reminder, and yeah, you have the connection that it's essentially, it's like an icon of God's relationship with creation or something like that. That you're able to look up at this thing that's showing, okay, I am, because he makes the covenant between Noah and then every single creature for everlasting generations. And it's like, so he's set this icon of the relationship. And there's also the flip side of, if you're being distracted, or if you're finding your participation is being drawn to things that are making you not look up or ever notice this icon of the relationship, then you forget that it's there. That, you have the icon appears in the sky when the clouds show up, and there's a sort of a disconnect between heaven and earth in a sense. So you have that sort of through line or continuity that's there. But if you're not looking at it, if something else has shown up and clouded your attention below the rainbow, then you're going to wind up kind of not remembering, not just like cogitatively, but also in your actions. You're going to stop reattaching to that relationship if you lose that awareness.
Also, along with all that, you were talking about relevance realization. That goes into your statement about choosing the lower thing instead of the higher thing. The way you know which one is lower and which one is higher is by, looking up and receiving the, emanation from above on that. And if you're, not regularly looking up, then you're just attending to lower things, and it's very easy to get them disordered without the proper realignment upwards.
I completely agree, and I would maybe just add also with the distributed cognition, like just to make sure that it is indeed for sure rain and not a sprinkler or something like that. Like just the extra perspective helps, but then that if you guys are unified in doing everything that you just said, then 100%.
So what's the rainbow that comes from the sprinkler? That's not the covenant, right? So yeah, I wanted to add a little bit to what you said, Casa, because like I'm pretty sure, right? Like all creation through Noah, right? So he's the mediator, right? And like he partially mediated by putting everything in the ark, right? So like and like in order to put things in the ark, like you kind of have to name them as well, right? So like they're carrying his naming forth into creation, right? And thereby they're under his dominion, right? So in that sense, that's the way that he's mediating all of earth in the covenant. So so now I'm gonna connect to the things that you guys said, because we're all really close in our thinking, which is, I guess, a good thing or horribly bad, either way. So I was like thinking about what does it mean to have a bridge, right? So I just cut the bridge in half, right? And it's like, okay, like now there's something on your side, and that's the bridge head, right? So like it has to be somewhere, right? And then everything starts organizing around the bridgehead, because everything has to converge in order to partake in the bridge, right? So like now you immediately get a structure, right? Like an organizing structure that needs to sustain that, right? Like, and it becomes a center of attention, right? And then the other thing is that it bridges something, right? So it's like a mediation to outside, right? So like I immediately made the connection with the gate of the city, right? Because the gate of the city is like a bridge, right? Like it's bridging the internal and the external, right? And the fact that you have a bridge, right, changes the nature of the boundary, right? So like what a wall would mean with a gate or without a gate is something completely different, right? Like the one is a prison and the other one is a stronghold, right? Like it's like the opposition of what it used to be, right? And so like uh so there's the fact that the bridge had exists, right? And I'm thinking of the stone of Jacob's ladder, right? like it restructures everything around it, right? Like so it changes the nature of the land having access to the bridge, right? Like it just changes what it means to be in the land, right? And it creates the us them, right? Or us other, right? The dynamic, um, and then the bridge is the channel that mediates the introduction of the other, right? Of the outside, right? And then there's two things, right? Like the outside can come in as a guest, right? Or like we saw with the wall, right? Like it can also come in as an invader, um, and use that same bridge, right? So like if we're talking about structure, right? Like recognizing that potential, right? Like requires infrastructure of that bridge to guard it against unwanted influence. Yeah, so no questions in the chat. I think it was really fruitful. The sun was shining through the rain that was washing us in rainbows. And we're kind of keeping up the pace, although yeah, like the symbolism is fruitful, which is interesting because we're gonna deal with poisonous fruits next week. So see y'all next week.